Bunch of questions, number 13 through 17 in the review packet number 2. Is looking at some of your responses. Some of you are very close, just off on little things. We'll talk about that as I hit stuff. So the first thing we want to do is number 13, and I want to graph this trig function. Now the first thing I want to do is get this set up perfectly. Right now this -2 here out in front wants to go on the end. And we also need to factor out the pi over 4 in front of this x. So I'm actually going to rewrite the equation up here. It's going to be y equals, we're going to write the 2 cos first. Then I'm going to factor out the pi over 4. When I do that, I get x plus 4 left over in the parenthesis. And then I'm going to put the -2 on the end. So you always want to get that in the correct format, and then we're going to work from left to right, writing down all the important things. So we always start off with amplitude, frequency, then period, right? So the amplitude is 2, the frequency is pi over 4, and then the period is going to be 2 pi over the b, which is pi over 4. That makes the period 8. All right, so that takes care of this guy and this guy. Now this guy gives me the starting point. So we're going to start this graph at x equals -4. You always do the opposite, oops, if it affects the x. Then to get the end point, we take the starting point and add on the period, which makes +4. Then we get the -2 here, and that's our 3 m's. This guy is our midline. So the midline is going to be y equals -2. That also gives me the max and the min. And the min would be the midline minus the amplitude, which makes that -4. So this list is basically your partial credit, and then I look at the graph. And we want to label at least 4 points on here. I usually like to do 5, but here we go. So I know the midline is at -2. So here's my midline. The max is 0. The min is going to be -4. I also always label my scale here. My starting point is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, back at -4, and we're going to end at 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, now we're going to do the cosine curve. The cosine curve starts at the max and ends at the max. So we're starting, so the max is 0 at -4, and we're going to end at the max, right? Then, right smack dab between these guys, we're at the minimum. Then halfway between the 2 blue dots here, so at -2, we've got to be on the midline, and a +2. All right, so here's my graph. And then we got to label these points. 4, 0, 2, -2, 0, -4, -2, -2, and -4, 0. So that would have gotten you full credit for the trig graph. This list, and then to label. All right, next one. A lot of you did like these, got these correct, which is good. H of 5 means I'm plugging 5 into the h function. Doesn't get any easier than that. It's 1/5. All right, this one, you're plugging 2 into the g function first. So g of 2 would be 2 plus 2, which makes 4. So I'm done with that now. Now I'm going to take the 4 and plug it into the next function, which is f. So f of 4 would be 16 times 2 is 32. 32 minus 4, I'm getting 28. Okay, so I'm done with that. And now take that answer and plug it into h. So h of 28 is 1 over 28. And that final number is the answer that is correct. All right, next one, instead of a number, I'm giving you g of x. That means our answer is going to be a formula. So I'm going to take the g of x formula, which is this guy, and plug it into f. So I'm doing 2x plus 2 squared minus x plus 2. All right, now I'm going to clean this up. So I got to do x plus 2 squared. So I'm going to bring down the 2. And when I square that, I get x squared plus 4x plus 4. And then I got to subtract off both of these. So it's going to be minus x minus 2. So now this makes 2x squared plus 8x plus 8 minus x minus 2, which now becomes 2x squared plus 7x plus 6. Some of you had plus 10 at the end, and that's because you didn't distribute the minus sign to both these. Anytime you're subtracting, it's incredibly important you put parentheses. Now, 15. You have $100 to invest at 25% annual interest, compounded continuously. So compounded continuously means we're going to use per. So that might be something you guys want to add to your formulas for the final exam, right? Compounded continuously, although most of you have this one memorized, means we're going to do PERT. And usually you have to set it equal to something, right? A sub t. Okay. So we're starting off with 100. That's our P. So I'm going to do 100 E. How long will it take? 25% annual interest, so it's 0.25 T. And how long will it take us to double our money? So we want to end up at 200. All right. So my first step to solving this now is going to be to divide by the 100. So this is e to the 0.25t equals 2, right? Now we're going to use logs. Anytime there's a variable in the exponent, we're going to log it. And since it's e, we're going to do natural log. So it's the natural log of e, right? 2 would go here, equals 0.25t. And I'm going to divide by 0.25. Now we're going to talk about over 0.25. Now some of you left that as your answer, which is actually incorrect because it's not finished. 0.25 means there's 1/4 in the denominator, because you can't leave fractions inside fractions. You also can't have decimals inside fractions. It's all the same thing. So we're not quite done here. You have to keep, change, flip this. And when you keep, change, flip it, this becomes the answer to the question. Now, other thing I want to point out to you is this thing I'm circling right here. Get an exact answer. That means decimals are not accepted. Please keep in mind, this test was written so you weren't supposed to be using a calculator. So if you're giving me a decimal answer, I technically know you're using a calculator and you're not supposed to be. So exact answer means absolutely no decimals will be accepted. So that would be completely wrong if you were getting a decimal answer. All right, next question, number 16. This was pretty good for looking at the answers. In October, apples begin falling off the tree once it hits peak at an exponential rate. Okay, 2 days after peak, there are 20 apples left on the tree. 4 days after peak, there are 5 apples left on the tree. So what we want to do here is we're going to use, since it says exponential rate, we're going to use our exponential function here. So, highlights, exponential rate. As soon as you see that, I know I'm using y equals ab to the x. Okay, now we need 2 points. And so 2 days after peak, there were 20 apples. And 4 days after peak, there were 5. So I make my 2 points. And then I'm going to use this formula to get the answer. So I'm going to compare. So we have the y is 20. So 20, we're going to compare that to the 5. And then we're going to do a, b to the 2 over a, b to the 4. Now, a equals, if you do this right, this would be b to the negative 2. Right? Or you could have had 4 over 1 equals 1 over b squared. Right? So you can cross multiply here. So 4b squared equals 1. b squared equals 1/4. Take the square root. B equals, now this is the only time you don't have to put plus minus because bases are always positive. So this would be 1/2. So now I know we have y equals a 1/2 to the x. Use either of the original points. I'm going to use the first one. So 20 equals a 1/2 squared, right? So that's 20 equals 1/4 a. So a equals 80. So now, see how that's a of t? You've got to use function notation. So a of x equals 80, 1/2 to the x. Now, if all you've got written down is this, it's incorrect. You need the entire thing. A of x equals 80, 1/2 x. Okay, next one. How many apples were on the tree at its peak? Well, that's when you would plug in 0, or the answer would just always be what's in front, so 80 apples. Most of you got that, okay? What is the continuous decay rate? All right, so that means I want to take our formula and set it equal to 80e to the rx. I want to figure out what the r is. So obviously the 80s would cancel. So this becomes, actually, let me draw a line here. So we separate. So this becomes 1/2 equals e to the r. Can you guys hear the puppy crying? So now we're going to log this. So it's going to be natural log of 1/2 equals r. This is the answer, 1/2, natural log of 1/2. Some of you only have the half written down as the answer, or 50%. That is not the answer, guys. It's the whole thing, natural log of 1/2. All right, next one. Interpret this. Now, some of you have the wording just a little bit off. If this is the inverse, that means a of 1 has to equal 40, right? You flip it. And that means 1 day after peak, there were 40 apples on the tree. And that's the best sentence you could basically give me. There's other versions that I took, but you can't just say after day 1 there were 40 apples on the tree. What does day 1 mean? It's 1 day after peak. You got to be pretty specific based on the question. All right, now they want us to make the inverse. So we want to take this equation and switch the x and the y. So I'm going to end up doing x equals 80, 1/2 to the x, right? I'm going to divide by 80. Okay. And now I have to log it. So let's see, or this is y. I'm sorry, I apologize. I switched my x and y. So now this becomes log base 1/2 x over 80 equals y, right? That's one answer I'll accept. Another answer is if you log both sides, you end up with y equals log x over 80 over log 1/2. I took that as well, because that's an acceptable answer. All right, final question. Solve graphically sine 2x over the interval 0 to 2 pi. So guys, solving graphically means I want you to graph this and this. So that means we want to graph y equals sine 2x. So what I'm going to do is amplitude, frequency, period, the whole list. So the amp is 1, right? The freq is 2. The period is 2 pi over 2, which is pi. Okay. So amplitude, frequency, period, starting point. Right? Notice that x is all by itself, so we're starting at x equals 0. The endpoint would be x equals 0 plus, which is pi, 0 plus the period. Okay? The midline, there's nothing attached here, so it's 0. The max would be 1, and the min would be -1. So this is what we're going to graph for y equals sine 2x. So I'm going to set this up here. Okay. Now we're going to start at 0 and end at pi, but check this out. 0 to 2 pi. That means even though we're ending at pi, this thing wants us to go all the way out to 2 pi. So here we go. Okay, so if I like to do even boxes, 1, 2, 3. How about we make that pi, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, so the 2 pi. I'm not even sure the paper I gave you guys had a grid on it. I can't remember. But if it does, I always go even a number of boxes out because everything with trig is cut in half. Max is 1. Just so we can see it, I'll do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. I can make my scale anything I want. So here we go. Now the sine curve looks like that, right? So I'm starting and ending on the midline, and halfway I'd be on the midline. Then halfway between these guys would be at the max, and halfway between these guys would be at the min. So that's why I always use an even number of boxes. So that's that guy. And then we want to go out to 2 pi. But see how it's a soft bracket? So that means it's going to be open circle. Here, and then down. All right, so here's my graph for the first part, sine 2x. Now, I also want to set that equal to 1, so that means I'm going to graph the line y equals 1, which should just be a horizontal line that looks like that. All right, so if you notice, you guys, we hit here and here. Those are the 2 answers to the question, so I just got to figure out what those are now. Well, see how that's pi? This would be pi over 2. What would halfway to pi over 2 be? This would be pi over 4. So the first one hits at x equals pi over 4. That's one of the answers. And check this out. 1 pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4, 4 pi over 4. This one hits at 5 pi over 4. So anytime you're asked to solve something graphically and it's a trig equation, you literally just make them into 2 graphs. We're graphing y equals sine 2x. Make your list, and just make sure you go all the way out to where the interval ends. Okay? And then you're going to graph the other one, which is y equals 1, and find out where they hit each other. All right, guys, that's the end of the second review packet. Now, keep in mind, if it's in these review packets, you need to know how to do it. I'm not wasting your time at all with these questions. So don't be like, that may not show up on the final. Remember, I wrote the final. So if I have a question like this and I'm practicing with you, it means you need to know how to do it. It's not going to be the exact same question, but it's going to be something similar. All right, so if it's in these packets, you must learn how to do it. All right, you must learn how to do it. I'm also going to put a hard copy. I have a nicely done out answer key, so you have that for reference as well. And now start working on the next one, and we'll go over that next week.